On November 21st, 1990, Nintendo released F-Zero on the Super Famicom. It would go on to redefine the racing genre and influence many games. Everything from Daytona USA, Wipeout and more. The roots all lie in F-Zero, and I'll cover some of those at another time. But today I'm focusing on possibly the most famous game to ever evolve from F-Zero. Today we focus on Super Mario Kart. One of two Super Famicom launch titles, the other being Super Mario World, F-Zero is released to critical acclaim, taking full advantage of Mode 7, a graphics mode on Nintendo's console that allowed a background layer to be rotated and scaled on a scanline by scanline basis. Most famously, this allows a perspective effect that gives the impression of three-dimensional graphics. The Big N's innovative technology meant that at the time F-Zero was unique, earning mass praise from gamers and critics alike. But one thing was missing. It wasn't a two-player game. The game's producer, Shigeru Miyamoto, was acutely aware of this, and work began on a sequel. A mere 7 people, 8 if you include Miyamoto, worked on the follow-up. Nintendo greats Kono and Sugiyama were amongst them, and took on the role of directors, with Sugiyama largely being in charge of the design of the game's characters, background and planning, and Kono the technological aspects such as gameplay logic. Both men remained active within the series for many years, with 2003's GameCube release Double Dash being Sugiyama's last hands-on role, but Kono still remains lead producer on Mario Kart games to this day. But I've gotten ahead of myself. The F-Zero sequel they began working on was miles apart from the Mario Kart game we all know today. What worked in F-Zero, racing at over 400 km an hour along incredibly straight lines, just wasn't possible in a two-player split-screen scenario, due to the Super Famicom's hardware constraints. Instead, the track's designs are made to be compact, with lots of twists and turns, and inevitably, this also meant new vehicles were needed. The Formula 1 style used in the original game proved just too tricky to navigate in this new tighter environment. You just wouldn't be able to build up as much speed. So it seemed the natural and possibly only choice for the game was kart racing. Even this proved to be problematic in its own right, however. Before Mario and his cohorts entered the picture, the game's main playable characters were just 8 young men clad in overalls. They all had different colour helmets, a colour scheme to differentiate between them, but when they were racing, you just couldn't tell who was who. They all had the same form, and the creators felt it might even be a bit boring. The early dynamics of the game were there though. Having convinced Miyamoto of the benefits, the team set off to a nearby go-karting track at a recreation resort called Nemu no Sato. The aim was simple: have fun, but most importantly, have the programmers experience what it would be like to drive an actual kart, the G-force involved, low perspective, drifting, and little slip-ups that could cause the kart to spin out. These were all items they would like to have incorporated into the essence of the game, and Kono and Sugiyama even went as far as to build a model remote control kart themselves, complete with engine. It was quite big at over 50 centimeters, and again was to help programmers experience how a kart truly functions. But sadly, less than 10 seconds after turning this very fast and loud creation over to the game's main programmer, he crashed it into a wall and totaled it. Despite all this, progress was being made. The 8 overall clad kart drivers and the driving mechanics behind them were being refined. For added excitement, they could now throw oil cans, which left the track slippery and would cause their opponents to skid out. Unfortunately, they still were just too hard to tell apart. They needed an instantly recognisable character, one that you wouldn't mistake from behind. In fact, they needed 8. Mario and Luigi were already wearing overalls, something that helped with their pixel animation, and because of their different colours, red and green, looked well on screen, and it was easy to differentiate between them. They were pretty much made for the job. Yoshi, Peach, Bowser, Toad, another 4 that just stood out. It was the 10th anniversary of the arcade hit Donkey Kong Jr., and he handily wore a shirt, something his dear old dad didn't. That was 7. For the 8th choice, it wasn't as straightforward, and they even tried rendering a Goomba at one stage, before finally settling on a Koopa Troopa. Now they just needed to refine the game. All platforming titles involving Mario to that point had one thing in common: power-ups. They were a massive focal point of their games. Mario Kart would be no different. The oil cans became banana peels, something only Donkey Kong Jr. could now throw. Green shells, a feather from Super Mario World to allow you jump higher. Red shells that could home in on a target. Mushrooms that made you faster. Stars gave you a small boost but also made you invulnerable. Ghosts that could steal your opponent's item. And lightning that shrinks all racers except the user and more. There were even coins you could collect that would increase your overall top speed. The main aim at this stage was to make the game fun and accessible to all. Even the worst of drivers when given access to the dreaded lightning or homing red shell now had a chance to level out races even more, with these items more likely to appear for the player racing in last place. A lot of time and effort was put into creating just the right balance, and it really shows. Although development only took 1 year and the game came out within 2 of the Super Famicom's release, the finished game was and is nothing short of outstanding. The third best-selling SNES game of all time, it's fair to say the public and reviewers just ate it up, with Mario Kart regularly receiving scores of 8.5 and above. Reviewers don't always see what we do, however. They are often privileged to prototype samples and or unfinished versions of games. Take this copy of Mario Kart for example. The form factor of the shell is quite unfamiliar to a lot of people, having only been known to have been used to house a handful of titles. So what better place to begin than talk about what we do know. In the 90s, hobby Consolas was for Spain what Mean Machines or Games Master was to us in Ireland and the UK. Think Electronic Gaming Monthly or GamePro if you're in North America. In the same way, those magazines were our top source of gaming reviews, previews, cheats and more. Hobby Consolas serviced that need in Spain, reviewing and previewing everything from the Sega Mega Drive, Game Boy, Atari Lynx, NES, Game Gear, SNES and more. It featured some very well established reviewers in Juan Carlos Garcia Diaz, Jose Luis Sanz, Marcus Garcia and more. But why is that relevant? This exact copy of Super Mario Kart is the very one that was reviewed by the elf, Marcus Garcia himself, to write an article for issue 15 of the magazine all those years ago. So let's have a look and hear some of what he had to say about the game. What would you think if we told you that the latest adventure of Mario and Company doesn't pass through inhospitable places, thousands of platforms and hundreds of long never-ending levels? You would surely think that we are pulling your leg. But if you think about it, it wouldn't be so scary. That idea of our soulmates and foes forgetting their quarrels and getting together in harmony to partake in something that would transform them into friends for an instant, to ride a kart and jump into competition across super fun circuits. It seems that indeed Nintendo has realised that Mario and his enemies are tired of fighting each other, and they've come up with a genius idea of creating Super Mario Kart, a brilliant cartridge in every one of its aspects, which stand out especially for its impeccable and perfect gameplay. Lakitu the God, the mischievous character that rides a cloud and can be found in Super Mario World and Super Mario World 3, is in charge of organising this hectic and fast event, where each driver is out to prove that they are qualified to win gold in each of the Grand Prix. But don't think the guys at Nintendo have set out to create just a racing game. No, in Super Mario Kart you will find everything that you need to enjoy yourself for a long and happy time. 8 characters to choose from, multiple tracks, 4 game modes and an amount of extra options that would surprise even the most talented of drivers. Throughout these pages you will find all the possible game modes and other features of importance, but let's start our trip by going through the many menus in Super Mario Kart. The first option is to play with 1 or 2 players. If we choose 1 player we could take part in the time trials or Mario GP, 50 or 100cc. On the contrary, if 2 players want to take part, we will have the chance to do it thanks to the split screen mode. Our options will now be Mario GP, also a different cylinder capacity, Match Race, or the extremely fun Battle Mode. Once we have made these decisions, we will be met with the pleasant surprise of being able to choose our favourite driver amongst the 8 most endearing characters of this mind-bending world. The acclaimed Mario and Luigi, the beautiful Princess Toadstool, the charismatic Yoshi, the Mushroom Toad, Koopa the Turtle, Donkey Kong Jr. and Bowser himself. Who will be the chosen one to climb the podium in Super Mario Kart? And the best of all is yet to come. When a tri-dimensional Mode 7 scroll places you in the starting line, the light goes green and your kart speeds through the nice tracks. You will realise that Super Mario Kart is the most endearing racing game of all time. The target of our driver, whoever he or she is to go faster than everyone else, get to the lead, take over all your adversaries, pick up items, use them, and avoid those thrown by your opponents. And don't worry about the choice of circuits, because they amount to the far from negligible number of 24. and all of them set in the amazing worlds of Mario. Donut Plains, Bowser's Castle, Ghost Valley, Koopa Beach, Chocolate Island and Vanilla Lake will be some of the colourful sceneries that are recreated in the faultless Super Mario Kart. From now on, all the characters in this kart, including Bowser, Donkey Kong Jr. and Koopa Troopa, will be part of your most playable dreams, and you will realise that even if they are small thugs, they are some of the most endearing guys you will ever find, even if they overtake you and put obstacles in your way. It's clear the elf seems to have shared the common consensus of the time and thoroughly enjoyed and praised the game, and while Marcus would go on to leave Hobby Consolas later, several of his co-reviewers remained, one of whom this very game was purchased from. Played on a Super Famicom that they had at the time in their newsroom, the shape of the cartridge shell obviously stood out and differs quite dramatically from the standard design of the time, something I will readdress shortly. But first let's look at it and a few other Super Mario Kart PCBs. There are other Super Mario Kart prototypes out there, one even has quite a few differences to the release version. There's a different title screen, Mario and Luigi's kart is slightly different in the player select screen, Lakitu's flag has no X when you travel backwards, there is no border in the cup selection screen, Cheep Cheeps are upside down, and more, even including different music and places. It truly is an incomplete version of the game, and has even been described as being buggy at times when playing. Sold on eBay in June 2012, this next version's ROM was actually dumped, the unfinished version still hasn't been. And while the physical shape of this one still differs from the release version, it was found to have identical gameplay to the standard US release, with none of the aforementioned alterations or bugs. This PCB is also a bit larger than its unfinished prototype counterpart. So when we look at the prototype I have here, the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice something straight away. Its PCB is pretty much identical to the previous one apart from the sticker, and with good reason. It also has gameplay that is identical to the finished version, but unlike its counterpart, it came with an outer cartridge to protect it, and an unusual one at that. To my knowledge, through speaking to other prototype and game collectors, only the Super Nintendo Control Deck Tester, Campus Challenge 1992 kart, Mother 2 prototype, Powerfest 94 kart, Super Game Boy prototype, and the ill-fated Super Nintendo CD add-on are the only ones known to exist with this form factor, albeit the Super Nintendo CD just has one shoved up inside it. But those carts all have one thing in common, they all needed extra space, and I'll use the Campus Challenge 1992 kart as an example to explain why. The majority of these games have a second horizontal PCB layered on top. In Powerfest 94 case, it allowed for 3 different games and 1 Powerfest chip to keep track of score and show the title screen, to coexist next to each other. This obviously would need extra circuitry for the output connection, so that black box-like object in the upper right corner, that was used to connect the games and competitions so Nintendo could keep track of the scores. In the Super Mario Kart prototype I have here, there is an obvious lack of a horizontal PCB and seems to have just been a case of not having enough room in a standard PAL or NTSC cartridge, but what I did notice was the following. The outer shell has PAL version scrawled on it in now fading red marker. When I put the game in a PAL Super Nintendo however, it just didn't work. You see, the SNES is a Loco chip that has to match between cartridge and console. The chip for America, NTSC, and Japan, ntsc-j, is actually the same because the regions are protected simply by the physical differences in the cartridges. The European version had a different chip however, because it shares the same cartridge with the Japanese version. What I can only presume is that by PAL version they meant this version of the game, even though it donned a nice Super Famicom prototype style jacket, is in English. It was also released in North America before Europe, and as I said previously, has a pretty much identical PCB to the other NTSC prototype that was found, so this all adds up. Having worked directly in research and development myself, I realise schedules can be tight, deadlines can sometimes be missed, and there are often late nights, but one thing always ran true: you pushed as far and as hard as you could to produce top quality products. A similar work ethic never seems to have been truer than with the creation of this game. The fact that they seem to have had serious fun developing it is also very evident. Mario Kart itself went on to mould and influence a style that was often copied but never replicated, and the series went on from strength to strength. Holder of 6 Guinness World Records, including first console kart racing game and longest running kart racing franchise, Guinness even ranked Super Mario Kart number 1 in a list of best-selling console games of all time, based on its initial impact and lasting legacy. The series has sold well over 100 million copies worldwide and continues to provide the same entertainment value to players of the new games as the first one did all those years ago, so surely we should forgive them for mislabeling a cartridge. Although finished, this could simply have been an early translation of the game, but as I mentioned, the gameplay and text seems to be identical to the finished version of the game. So what have we learned? An NTSC PCB in a Super Famicom prototype shell with PAL version scribbled on it in now fading red marker. A Frankenstein's monster if we dare. But let's look at it like this. Not only has it the rich history of having been the very cart Marcus Garcia and co at Hobby Consolas would have reviewed and played on. Maybe it was them who owned the red marker. But consider this. Super Mario Kart was worked on by a mere 8 people. It's quite possible, as it's a prototype, that at least one of those people involved might have also tested and or played on this very cart.